Welcome! This is the first video of our series covering basic piece movement and board setup. Let's get started. This is the king, and these are pawns. The king can move one square in any direction that touches him. Kings cannot hop over pawns or capture his own pieces. The only piece that can hop over other pieces is the knight, which we'll cover a little bit later. Pawns, on the initial move, can move one square or two squares forward. Each move after the first move, they can only move one forward. Pawns capture one square diagonally. For instance, in this position, black can only capture one of these two pawns. Black cannot capture straight forward, but he can capture one square diagonally. To emphasize how the king moves, one square in any direction, the king can come here, and this king could come here. Kings can also capture pieces. That's basic movement of the king and the pawn. Let's talk about how bishops move. Bishops move in long diagonals. So this bishop could move to any of these squares. For instance, remember pawns capture one square diagonally. In this situation, this bishop can move to any of the highlighted squares. He can move along this diagonal, he can move here, or he could capture that pawn, like so. So remember, bishops move in long diagonals. Next is the rook. Whereas the bishop is master over the diagonals, the rook deals in verticals and horizontals. So for instance, the white rook can move to this square or any of these, including capturing this pawn. Whereas the black rook can simply move to any of these squares. In chess, white always moves first, so in this example, say I create an escape square for my king. I attack the king, so he must move, and I can take the rook. In our next example is the queen, the most powerful chess piece. Whereas the king is most important because if you lose him, you lose the game, the queen is most powerful because she is a combination of both the bishop and the rook. So she has mastery over long diagonals, verticals, and horizontals. For instance, the queen can now move to any of these squares. Once I move her here, use a move for black. Now you can see the power of the queen in that she can move to any of these squares. The queen is by far the most powerful piece. All you need to remember about the queen is that she is a combination of the rook and bishop. And now the most troublesome piece, the knight. He moves in an L-shaped pattern, or a 3-1. So this knight can move here or here, or 1, 2, 3, 1, or the L-shaped pattern. So this knight will move here, this knight here, and I wanted to emphasize that the knight in the center of the board is much stronger than the knight on the edge of the board, because this knight is centralized and is an octopus. because if you notice, he can move to 8 different squares, and options are fantastic in chess. But this knight, on the other hand, only has 4 options that he could possibly move to. So by putting a knight on the edge of the board, you cut 4 of his legs off and ruin many of his possibilities. That covers all of the piece movement. Now this is our initial position in chess. And again, white always moves first. It's easy to remember that we have the pawns on the front row, our rooks in the corners, our knights, our bishops, and then the royalty in the center, the king and the queen. Now, when setting up the board, I've encountered that students tend to have a problem remembering where the king and queen go. And this simple rule will help you remember when setting up the board where the queen goes. If you notice, the queen is on a light square, and the black queen is on a dark square. So when setting up the board, the queen will go on her own color, or the dress will match the shoes. That covers our first video. In our next video, we will talk about basic checkmates.